You're listening to Retail Disrupted, a podcast that explores the latest industry developments and the trends that will shape how we shop in the future. I'm your host, Natalie Berg. Hello and welcome to the very first episode of 2026. Today, we are going to be talking with someone who's been helping brands on the front lines of disruption, global logistics expert Becky Lombardo. Becky has worked with some of the world's most iconic retailers, including Harvey Nichols, Fortnum & Mason, ASOS, Dunelm, and Matches Fashion. Today, she runs Laundry Consulting, where she helps brands navigate the increasingly unpredictable world of global trade. Before we welcome Becky onto the show, I would love to share with you my thoughts on what we can expect for retail in 2026. Huge topic, I know, but I am going to do my best to keep this short and sweet. I shared a post about this on LinkedIn earlier today, and I am going to pull that post up now so I can talk you through it. But just a little bit of context, what I'm going to share with you now came from our quarterly write-up from the KPMG Retail Think Tank. It's such a privilege to be a part of this group. There are 9 of us, and every few months we meet up at KPMG's office in Canary Wharf, and we just chew the fat. We talk about all the key trends, everything from the impact of weight loss drugs through to agentic AI. And every quarter, we are debating and dissecting the health of the sector. So it's a really fantastic group. And something I love about being part of this is just the diversity of thought in the room. So there are other retail experts like myself, other retail analysts, many names that will be familiar to you, I'm sure. But we also have an economist, we have a property expert, we have a banker. So it really allows us to have this holistic view of what's happening in retail. And I think that's pretty special. So the reason I'm spending a couple minutes at the start of this episode to tell you more about it is because what I'm going to share with you now is my take on retail in 2026. But you can also check out the KPMG Retail Think Tank website where you can download the report and get all of our individual summaries of what we are expecting this year. So I would definitely recommend that you do that, and I will include a link in the show notes. Okay, so it goes without saying that 2026 is going to be another year of navigating disruption, and I would say that, right? But it's true. We've got ongoing geopolitical instability, weak consumer demand, sustained pressure on labor and supply chains. So a lot of challenges, a lot of uncertainty that unfortunately hasn't gone away. Retailers are going to have to do more with less. This is an ongoing theme. It's something we're actually going to talk about in today's episode. So you have to do more with less, but you still need to make targeted strategic investments, particularly in areas like cybersecurity. In an increasingly digital ecosystem, collaborative and cross-industry responses are going to be essential to managing risk. Channel complexity is going to continue to intensify, and this is driven by 3 things. 1, the growth of resale and social commerce. I'm going to lump those together for the sake of brevity here. 2, the emergence of agentic AI. And 3, the entrenchment of digital disruptors like Shein and Temu. Now, the temptation for any retailer is to be everywhere, right? Because of this channel proliferation. There's this kind of FOMO pressure to have a presence across every retail touch point. But I think it's really important that retailers are guided by customer relevance. Follow the customer, but don't follow your competitors. Don't feel the need to be everywhere. Now, when it comes to e-commerce, the evolution of e-commerce has been largely incremental. We've seen faster delivery, free returns, frictionless checkout. Things have generally just gotten kind of marginally better over the years. There have only really been 2 true step changes, which was the launch of mobile commerce and now the current AI wave. Now, what's different about this wave is that it's being driven not by the retailer, it's being driven by the customer. Things are moving so quickly. And so, from a retailer's perspective, speed, agility, and real time hyper personalization are going to be the things that separate the leaders from the laggards. Another thing that I think we need to be paying attention to in 2026 is the risk of cognitive complacency. Now, I've talked about this before on LinkedIn. I've talked about it on the podcast, but just very briefly, as AI becomes more embedded in decision making, there is a risk that we become too reliant on AI, and that erodes critical thinking across retail teams. We need to be thinking about this in 2026. Meanwhile, as e-commerce becomes more immersive, more multidimensional, more dynamic, it's so important that physical retail, that bricks and mortar retail continues to evolve. The most successful stores will blend technology with the human touch. The most successful stores are going to be those that embrace this idea of tech-enabled human touch. Empowering store teams will be critical. Workforce engagement directly impacts service quality and operational resilience. So, in summary, retail success in 2026 is going to demand a very careful balance of tech innovation, operational efficiency, and sustainability. Retailers with a clearly differentiated business model and a commitment to continuous evolution, that's who's going to thrive in 2026. Okay, so that's my kind of brief take on where we are, where we're going. If you would like to learn more, I would encourage you to check out the full Retail Think Tank analysis, where you can find additional insights from Linda Ellett, James Sawley, Maya Knights, Nick Bubb, Jonathan DeMello, Charles Burton, Maureen Hinton, and Mike Watkins. Okay, now it's time to welcome Becky Lombardo to the show. Becky, welcome to Retail Disrupted. It's so great to have you here as my first guest of 2026. Before we jump in and start talking shop, can you give us a snapshot of your journey and what you do at Laundry Consulting?
Oh, thank you. No, lovely to be here. Thanks for having me. Essentially, what I do for my clients at Laundry Consulting is help them create solid foundations which allow them to then be as flexible as they possibly can. And that usually is flexibility they need to grow super fast or to deal with kind of some headwinds that are coming, of which they, kind of become increasingly more common. So yes, so working a lot on that kind of supply chain and logistics side of things to create that flexibility for brands to be brilliant and creative and do what they want to do in their space.
Yeah, and there have been so many headwinds. I mean, I think when we think about retail, we think about supply chains. It's just been wave after wave of disruption. We've had cost inflation, tariffs, carrier volatility, cyber attacks, even physical attacks in the Red Sea, which of course has led to longer routes and increased cost. And I know I'm sure you'll tell me that's not even a full list of everything that retailers and brands are going through. So, Becky, help us make sense of this. What, in your view, are the most pressing things that are keeping retailers up at night?
Yeah, I think you're right. That's not a full list, but that's kind of that kind of demonstrates just how much has been going on. I think it's actually without thinking about any kind of single thing, I think what is really hard for retailers at the minute with all of this disruption is each one of these kind of different types of disruption has come out of nowhere, and has been quite unpredictable. And so I think the hardest thing for retailers to do is to plan. And we're not the best at planning at the best of times because, you never know when people are going to buy. And, that age old challenge of forecasting is one, as old as retail itself. So I think that complete lack of ability to plan or prep for some of these, even with the best minds in the world, is what's made it really, really difficult. And it makes it really difficult for retailers to put down like long term plans for growth, which is really challenging in this kind of climate. If you want to commit to a plan and really follow it through, that reluctance to kind of make anything more than 12 months, I think is really, really difficult.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up early on in the conversation because I agree. I think that retailers have gotten used to disruption, but it's the uncertainty that's really wreaking havoc now. And if we just sort of uh, bring up the elephant in the room really early on in our conversation, just want to get your thoughts on tariffs because I think, in relation to all of this uncertainty, much of it is stemming from geopolitical tensions. And we know that rules can change overnight. costs can spike. And so, as retailers, it must be so hard to plan a strategy when the goalposts just keep moving. So, what's your advice here for those businesses that are affected by tariffs? Or I guess all businesses are affected by tariffs, some more than others. And what's your kind of advice for retailers just kind of navigating global trade at the moment?
Yeah, I think what it's teaching us is that you can take no part of your business for granted. So having real heavy weighting in any one area, whether that's kind of where you source from, whether that's kind of the markets that you're selling to, whether it's you're relying on one particular kind of part of your supply chain really, really heavily, and identifying and being really honest with yourself about where those seeing those as weaknesses in your business, identifying them, and then kind of being able to deal with them. I think that's actually the bit that I would say to retailers now to kind of think about. And tariffs just highlighted that really. Kind of for a lot of us, there's always been an over reliance in recent years on China sourcing, and actually that's kind of what it's thrown out. And what would be brilliant you've already seen it happening, and I'm sure there'll be more over the next 12 months is retailers will adapt to that. But it caught a few people out because it happened so quickly. And there was
Yeah.
lots of warnings and et cetera, et cetera. It's been talked about for a while. We can have all of those arguments. But actually, because we're retailers and because the trade is there, you don't do anything until really you kind of know that it's going to be a problem. And I think that mindset, we've always been able to move very, very quickly. There's certain parts of your business, and sourcing is one of them, that's actually really difficult to move. There's always going to be options and there's always things you can do, but it's really hard to change it quickly. And so I think identifying those areas, I think people are becoming far, far more aware of where those weak spots are, and they're becoming far more aware of their supply chain generally and the importance in their business. And the number of times now that I speak to CEOs who previously wouldn't really have understood much about their supply chain and now are kind of, having going toe to toe on some quite technical subjects now, it's kind of brought it up the chain.
So I guess my kind of follow-up question to you is what are retailers doing? So you kind of touched on sourcing and I'm hearing a lot. I mean, again, I'm a retail expert, not a supply chain expert, so I'm more of a layman in this field. But are things like nearshoring, is that something we're going to see more of? Do you predict sort of longer term shifts in how retailers source and how supply chains are structured?
Yes, I do, and I think it will vary by category quite considerably because I mean, there's certain things that actually, you're sourcing from that place because it's the best place to source from. Particularly around kind of certain aspects of fashion, for example, certain aspects of homeware. There are hotspots that make sense from a quality and a product point of view. Um, so in terms of kind of what I see, definitely I think there will be shifts. And what I'm seeing already is people starting to think about what they're doing, particularly on the sourcing side of things, but actually across their business. And if I was to kind of generalize it, and I think kind of all of these issues bring this to the fore, is it's that focus on profitability. I think in the last 5 years, post pandemic, we've had a far better, in my opinion, actually, far healthier for retail, much stronger focus on trading profitably. So this old idea of being able to, bring the profit in when the scale is there, actually that's kind of disappeared now. And actually that builds healthier businesses long term because you look at these things far, far earlier in the life cycle and kind of and deal with them. Um, and I think that's what's driving some of those conversations. So for some businesses, nearshoring is the right answer. For other businesses, actually what they've done is say, I'm sourcing in the right place, but I'm actually going to have to pass that cost on because that's the nature of my business. And actually I think my customer will understand that. Or if they're buying that product, they know it comes from there. So there's an understanding around that. And then for other businesses, they're just looking at where their markets are and potentially pivoting to maybe move away from some of those markets that are less profitable for them now to a market that's more profitable. So seeing a bit of a shift, for example, from US to Middle East.
Okay, that's interesting. And I guess transparency is so important for retailers, but also for customers too. And I think that's, when we think about transparency when in relation to sourcing and things like digital product passports and how, it's very clear the direction of travel that retailers are going to have to be able to open up that information, that data to the customer and allow them to make more educated decisions, but whether that's based on something around sustainability or price or various other factors. So uh, I guess just to go back to your point around scaling profitably, I mean, I keep hearing the same thing from retailers, which is that they need to do more with less. So they need to find those productivity gains. A lot of retailers, of course, are looking to tech to help them with this, to, especially AI to become more, operationally efficient by using AI. I think that's especially important now with the cost of labor going up. So if we look specifically at the supply chain, I mean, I would imagine a lot of retailers are already running a pretty tight ship. But what, in your view, what else can they do, and what else can they do without compromising service or customer experience? Because we know that retailers have to preserve that. So where can they focus their efforts to be able to do more with less?
I think there's always some really simple principles in supply chain. So you can look at rates and try and drill down on rates, but actually invariably, sometimes that works, particularly if you've got like a business that's been around or you've got contracts that have been around for a long time. But actually, kind of one of the simplest principles I always kind of share with my clients is what can you stop doing? Because stopping saves you way more money than anything else. And actually, it's really interesting when you go through these times and you actually examine what's adding value to the business and what your proposition is built around. If you're a luxury business, you don't want to save money by going to a cheaper carrier service because that's not your customer. However, what you might be doing is spending a lot of money on kind of like low level moves or lots of noise that kind of your warehouse, you've got two or three people who are just dealing with head office queries, for example. And it's that kind of stuff that actually when you really, really challenge yourself, you go, hang on a minute, this is all our money. We can spend this in a far better way. So reducing complexity in the business will always, always, A, shine a light on what you do well and make you focus on what you do well because you have to talk about it. But also, I think that point around reducing complexity, it saves you money because complexity does cost more.
Interesting to bring up luxury, because I know you've worked for some great luxury brands, some truly best in class retailers. Is there anything you can share with us about those businesses? What they did so well that others could potentially learn from?
Yeah, sure. Like one of the things I loved when I kind of made my move from between kind of fast fashion and high street into luxury, one of the things that was amazing is that ability to be able to be really laser focused on your customer. Like nobody knows and understands their customer like a luxury business. And actually, that's what really helps define and guide some of those decisions around what's important. And there's a bit more margin to play with by nature of the product, but actually expectations are higher as well. So you've got a customer who is looking as much for an experience, whether that's online or in person, but they are looking for an experience with that brand. And so that real in-depth knowledge of the customer really helps you shape that experience. So, for example, at Matches Fashion, people still talk to me now about the packaging and that whole unboxing experience that we created essentially out of a warehouse, but it was the way that we kind of trained people, the way we talked to people about who that customer was, that translated all the way through. And customers recognized that and they saw that. And people love things like the hand signed card, simple touches like that really resonated with that customer.
I want to stick with the customer for a little bit, because we know that customer expectations around how we shop, how we get our products, how quickly we get our products, this is just constantly evolving, and it creates a lot of complexity for retailers. I'd love to get your thoughts on how evolving customer expectations have impacted retailers, and what they're doing to kind of adapt and meet their needs.
Yeah, I think obviously online has just changed so much over the last 20 years that I think that was natural because it was just such a new channel. And I think it's really easy to get drawn into what other people are doing and kind of setting that as the bar for customer expectations. But actually, generally, what I find working with different businesses is it's about tailoring it to your customer. So if you've got a high quality product and a high price point product, yes, absolutely, there's a service element, but that's not just a service element of how quickly can I get it there, which is, I think, is a bit of a fallacy that everybody falls into. It's like, yes, there's an expectation that it's not going to take 10 days. But actually, if something's handcrafted and you set that expectation up front and that's part of the allure of that product, then actually that's okay. That fits with the customer that you're trying to attract and the product that you're selling. Um, but what that customer wouldn't expect is that they then have lots of problems around it, and they have to work out when is it going to arrive and how do I get my hand. Like you've got to manage that experience around it so it still feels luxury. So I think it's everything. It's all those small details around it that make a customer feel wanted and valued first and foremost, but also kind of make sure that it's in keeping with what they're expecting from you as a brand. If you're selling a commodity product, I don't want 10 emails from you. This is just something I've bought and I just want it to turn up, and it's probably dropped off my radar now because I'm a very busy person, and this is not something that is, I'm sitting on the doorstep waiting for. However, if it's something that I've saved up for, and it's a present, or it's something that kind of has that different emotional connection, then of course you want the experience to feel different. And I think putting that all together, rather than just saying, it's got to be faster because Amazon always do it fast. That's not, I think, necessarily what's needed. So I think it requires us to be a bit more creative now and tailored, and thoughtful around the experience we create.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. You need to ensure that that brand experience is consistent, and we know that it's getting very expensive to acquire new customers. It's getting harder to please existing customers. I love your point about it not necessarily being about speed, but actually the fact that it turns up, that it's reliable. There's a whole question around free delivery, and maybe we can touch on returns here as well, but free returns and whether or not that's actually a good thing and how can we address it. How do you take something away from the customer if it's not working from a business perspective? I also feel like all retailers today need to some degree, treat their customers like VIPs because there's so much competition. We don't do mediocre anymore. Every retailer has to kind of roll out the red carpet. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they need a super luxurious experience on the delivery side, because you're right. Sometimes it just needs to be fast and quick and reliable. But I'd love to get your thoughts on this and the role specifically that logistics and fulfillment play here. What else can retailers do, or how do you see this moving in the future?
I know what you mean. It's a really crowded space, and actually, because there's more solutions out there, it kind of almost really makes it a lot more confusing. But I think it goes back to that point that we were just talking about, which is you've got to know your customer and you've got to talk to them. You've got to understand where their pain points are. Actually, those customers who are buying from you regularly, they will tell you what they like and what they don't like. And if you're using that as your feedback to guide you, I think that's what we always kind of have done in all of the teams that I've worked in, where kind of they've been successful kind of customer centric businesses, is looking at your trust pilot, looking at your, spending a day with your customer care team, actually really understanding that. And that's why, luxury businesses, when they've got things like the VIP and private shopping functions, that's why they know those customers so well, because they talk to them all the time. So I think it's more about kind of actually making the edit is the hard bit. You can't do everything. Everything will look brilliant when you kind of look at it, but what is the stuff that is causing those pain points to your customers that they don't like? And that's quite specific to each business. So I'm looking at lots of different options at the moment. Some of it is about freeing up time to do more of that fun stuff and put more time and effort into kind of doing the proactive, nice comms with customers, rather than having to constantly be on there. Oh, we've got to always deal with the issues. So, like, how do you kind of free up time to do the stuff that is a value add as opposed to just answering a query? And some of it is about like technical things behind the scenes that just make things work better. So, for example, classic issue in our industry at the minute is still, if you've lost a parcel, then how do you know you've definitely lost it? And there's always that horrible moment of like, is it the customer's issue? Is it your issue? Who do we trust? Where do we sit in the middle of all this? And actually, for a genuine customer, it's a horrible experience. So looking at those kind of pain points and what you can do as a business, that kind of situation will be very different for you depending on who your customer is and what business you're in. The space will get more and more crowded with AI. That's almost part of the challenge. We could AI absolutely everything, but where are you? I would kind of, on the AI side, I'm giving you a rambling answer here, but
It
on
was
the
a
AI
rambling question, don't worry.
on the AI front, actually, I think it's going to be about that edit. So I would say kind of everything I'm seeing at the minute is we need to kind of maintain that ability to kind of keep critical thinking within the business to be able to kind of really grow and develop and kind of listen to that customer. So actually, AI should be on all the stuff that's not necessarily adding value to your business, that just needs to get done, so that it allows you to put that process and the human touch on the things that will add the value. And I almost think kind of in retail, we're probably going to go too far and then come back a little bit on the AI front. We know when some things might have our name on it, that's not the same as it being personalized. And I think that's kind of a bit of the trap that we're falling into at the moment with AI, is some of that stuff is, it still doesn't feel special.
Yeah, I think we're already seeing a little bit of a backlash. Brands kind of shouting that this is not AI generated and, this has been created by a human and, there's value in that. And I agree with you. I do feel like we're maybe going to go too far and then come back a little bit. And I mean, I just see it even on social media. You can kind of see now on LinkedIn which posts have been, written by ChatGPT. There's a kind of a tone to it that I do think yeah, we might claw back on a little bit. So let's talk about returns because we know that retailers have been tightening return policies. It's not unheard of for retailers to charge for returns these days. We've even seen some retailers banning some shoppers who they call serial returners. There's a lot of work that's been going into stopping this wardrobing trend where you wear it once and send it back, a huge problem in fashion. But returns generally is a perennial problem. And I think it's complicated because sometimes those shoppers who return the most are also those who shop the most. They can be your best customers. So it is a little bit nuanced. But let's get your take on this. What's the impact on logistics and warehousing? What does this look like from a retailer's perspective?
I mean, look, I go back to my earlier comment. What's the quickest way you can save money is to stop doing things. So that person is not a customer if everything they buy they send back. They've not actually bought anything from you. So they're not a customer. And actually, all they've done is cost you a lot of money in moving things around. You cut that level of activity out of your business and you're going to save money. And that's actually what we're seeing. So, kind of, whenever I've gone through these exercises with businesses, actually the decisions are very non-controversial. It sounds big when you put it in a headline, but they're actually very non-controversial when you look at it because you're never talking about kind of eliminating those customers who are a bit borderline, who might not know their sizing, and that it's not that. It's really obvious, kind of, and they're clearly not making you any money. So it's not, those ones are actually not difficult decisions. I think things like charging for returns, again, this is one where you have to tailor it to your customer. And I think with all of these challenges that they've been around supply chain and the drive for profitability generally, and customers seeing businesses fail, actually there's a greater awareness, I think, in the consumer that they almost have a bit of a responsibility as part of this. They've seen that trend of kind of buying things and sending everything back, and you don't have to be particularly well versed in retail to know that that's not going to be a long-term sustainable business model. So customers are actually aware of that. And I think if you put those kind of policies in place in the right business with the right customer, they are non-controversial as well. You're never giving it away for free. It's that you're charging for it as part of what you're selling. It's about where we show that price to the customer. There's no such thing as free returns. It's never been free. We've always paid for it. It's just a case of now, where do you put that cost? Are you putting that cost in your product price? Are you putting that cost as a separate piece at the checkout, or are you putting that cost on only the customers who use that service?
That's a really good point, and I do feel like there is more awareness. But something you've just said really triggered a thought, which is that if retailers were just a bit clearer about, look, we're charging for returns because we're going to invest in price for you as the shopper. I think that's actually a really strong message. And then there's also the sustainability message, which isn't going to sway everyone because everybody wants to buy more sustainably, but will they actually, pay for it or be inconvenienced to do so? That's the whole say do gap, which comes up a lot on the podcast. Generally, environmental and financial sustainability go hand in hand because no retailer likes to ship air, right? Like we want those containers fully loaded and, we want to be as efficient as possible. But it's obviously a lot more complex than that. So I'd love to get your take on, on sustainability and if you have any thoughts on returns and where else, that might go.
The really simple thing about sustainability is do less. First and foremost, if you can cut down what you're doing, do less, use less air freight, all of that stuff saves money. It's all good business decisions. So actually the two go hand in hand. However, I think one of the challenges with supply chain is that you are quite often on the receiving end of challenges, and so actually you're being quite reactive in terms of some of those decisions that you're making. So really, if you want to build sustainability at a business level, it's got to start all the way through the business. It's got to be in the planning stages. It's got to be in the buying stages, because actually everybody has to value that in order to allow you to drive the right result through at the end. It can't be a function you just pass off to your supply chain team, because it's not fair and it won't work. So actually everybody has to be aligned on that goal. I think that's the hardest thing really from a retail point of view. Is a lot of the big changes people could make are very basic, and they are common sense, simple things. But it's actually really hard to execute, which is why sometimes I think we kind of get drawn to talking about things, that nice and shiny and feel a bit more achievable. But actually, it's the basics, I think, that makes a big difference. And then to take your point on things like returns, that's an area where I think technology is going to really, really excel. So, particularly in fashion, fit is always the single biggest issue in terms of returns. And it's a really hard one. That's the one that most customers, they don't like it themselves because everyone would like it to be right first time. So, kind of ticking the box there. But also, I think that's the bit that makes people nervous with things like returns fees, because they're going, well, there's a bit of a two-way street here, because if you don't get it right and you missell something, or you describe something, then whose fault's that, and why am I paying for that? And that's where that edginess, I think, comes into, and the tension comes into that conversation. So I think a lot of there's some really exciting stuff happening in that space at the moment. Phoebe Gormley's just got a load of funding for her Fit Collective initiative. She's ex-Savile Row tailor background. I'm probably massively underselling her, but I think that's super exciting. To see a female founder doing so well, big up to her, but also you need something else in there that is actually going to help that whole process to run a lot more smoothly first time round. So I think there's going to be loads of kind of developments in that space that will allow it to be right first time, which will probably take some of the heat out of that conversation, particularly for fashion.
Yeah. Getting that sizing fit piece of the puzzle. I mean, that could unlock so much for retail, and I think it, from a consumer's perspective, would drive us to shop online more. And then when you factor in, we've got AI agents and much more personalization coming. It's an exciting time. Now, before we wrap up, let's talk about direct to consumer. A lot of brands are attracted to this model because of the margins, and also the customer connection, because you're the gatekeeper, you own that relationship. So it makes sense that brands are prioritizing D2C over traditional retail distribution. But these are two very different channels, different needs, different complexities. How would you advise brands here so they can tap into both D2C and traditional retail, and how can they do it profitably?
On paper, it's really nice to be like, oh, it'll be incremental. And that's a very kind of 2010s view of this world, is like, same with kind of going to new territories. Oh, just switch it on. Anything you get is extra. That's nice. It's not. And it kind of goes back to the point around complexity. You're deliberately doing something that's different in your business. It will drive change and it will drive costs. So it has to be part of your strategy. And that's kind of aligning all of those pillars in your business. So if you're going to go to D2C, how are you going to market? What's different about that customer? Who are you going after? What is it, what business aim, or what part of your business strategy is that channel fulfilling for you that B2B doesn't? And I think kind of by being deliberate and just stopping to ask some of those questions rather than just seeing it as extra cash, stops you from walking into some of those kind of easy profit traps, which I think when you don't know D2C, like some of those issues can really affect your profitability. And particularly a lot of it sits on the operations side, a change to your warehouse and space that you need, a change to kind of like some of the underlying costs, some of your carrier costs, things like returns that you don't currently understand and deal with. It's not just the cost to bring it back, it's also that cost of kind of what it does within your operation. What do you do with that stock? Where does that stock go? There's some very, very different elements to it that I think if you don't think about why you want to do it and what it brings to your business, it doesn't allow you to set up all of those and cost for all those operational elements.
Great. Well, Becky, thank you so much for being here today. You've given us some great tips on how to navigate supply chain disruption. Before we wrap up, where can our listeners find you or learn more about Laundra Consulting?
Oh, thank you. So LinkedIn is the obvious place. I've got all my links to my website on there. But I'm very old school. I'm always happy for a call as well. All my details are on LinkedIn.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to Retail Disrupted. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe to the podcast for more retail insights. We'll see you next week.